The bell above the door of the reading nook was a liar. It didn't jingle. It gave a tired, metallic sigh, as if announcing another customer was more of a burden than a delight. For 3 years, that sound had been the metronome of my life, counting out the beats of quiet days spent shelving books and wiping down the counter of the small cafe attached to the store. My world was one of paper and dust, of the low hum of the espresso machine and the hushed turning of pages. It was a small life, an ordered life, built on the foundation of needing very little and therefore risking even less. My routine was a fortress. I'd walk the same 12 blocks to work, order the same black coffee from myself, and arrange the daily newspapers into a perfect, crisp fan. In the afternoon, I'd straighten the local history section, my fingers tracing the spines of books that told the story of our small coastal town of Port Blossom. It was in that section, surrounded by faded photographs of fishing boats and timber mills, that I first started noticing him. Julian Croft. He wasn't just a customer. He was a landmark. A man who seemed carved from the same sturdy, quiet material as the old-growth forests that surrounded our town. He was older, maybe by 20 years, with silver threaded through his dark hair at the temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours spent looking at the horizon. He never browsed. He came in with a purpose, his steps measured and sure on the creaking floorboards. He'd nod to me, a brief, polite acknowledgement, and head straight for the nonfiction aisle. His presence had a weight to it, a quiet gravity that pulled the air in the small shop a little tighter. He dressed in simple, well-made clothes, dark sweaters, tailored trousers, that spoke of a wealth so profound it had no need to announce itself. Everyone in town knew who he was. The man who'd made his fortune in logistics and technology somewhere far away and had retired back to the grand, secluded house on the cliff where he'd grown up. The man whose wife, Eleanor, a celebrated artist, had passed away a little over a year ago. I watched him from behind the safety of my counter. I saw the way his large, capable hands handled a book, with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his formidable presence. I learned the sound of his voice, a low baritone that was always calm, always measured, whether he was ordering a history of maritime trade or a collection of poetry. I memorized the small details, the worn leather band of his watch, the way one corner of his mouth would lift slightly when he found the book he was looking for, the scent of clean air and something faintly like cedar that clung to him. These observations were my secret, a silent collection of facts I stored away without questioning why. He was a fixed point in my predictable orbit, a figure from a world so different from my own that he might as well have been from another planet. I lived in a tiny apartment above a bakery, counting every dollar, my past a carefully locked room I never visited. He lived in a fortress of quiet grief and unimaginable comfort. We were not meant to intersect. And then, one Tuesday in late October, the orbit shifted. The bell sighed its usual weary greeting, and Julian Croft walked in, the cool autumn air swirling in with him. But instead of turning toward the aisles, he walked directly to my counter. My heart gave a startled little kick against my ribs, a nervous flutter I immediately tried to suppress. He stopped, his hands resting lightly on the worn oak of the counter. His eyes, a deep, clear gray, met mine directly. They weren't cold, but they were assessing, perceptive. I felt suddenly transparent, as if he could see the stacks of unpaid bills on my kitchen table and the loneliness that settled in my chest every night. "Leo," he said. My name in his voice was a strange and solid thing. I hadn't realized he even knew it. "I have a proposition for you. If you have a moment." I could only nod, my throat suddenly dry. Propositions were not part of my routine. Surprises were not in the architecture of my carefully constructed life. "I'm beginning the process of packing up my late wife's studio and library," he said, his voice even, though I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow of remembered pain. "It's extensive. The task requires a degree of care and organization that I don't trust to a standard moving company. I need someone methodical. Someone quiet." He paused, and his gaze was so direct, so steady, that I couldn't look away. "I've seen how you handle the books here," he continued. "You're meticulous. I was hoping I could hire you to help me. It would be a short-term contract, for the next few weeks. I would, of course, pay you very well for your time." The air left my lungs in a slow, silent rush. Money. The word alone was a jolt. The part-time hours at the bookstore barely covered my rent and utilities. The idea of very well was an abstract concept, a dream belonging to other people. But it wasn't just the money. It was the offer itself. It was an invitation into his world, into that house on the cliff, into the quiet, private space of his grief. My caution, my ingrained instinct to retreat to the safety of the known, screamed at me to say no, to thank him politely and invent an excuse. This was a complication. This was a breach in the fortress walls. But another part of me, a quieter, more hopeful part that I had long ignored, was leaning forward, desperate to hear more. I don't have any professional experience in archiving or anything like that, I managed, the words feeling clumsy and small. A hint of that small smile touched his lips. I'm not looking for an archivist, Leo. I'm looking for a careful person. I can teach you the system I have in mind. The primary qualifications are patience and respect for the items being handled. I believe you have both. He said it like a fact, a simple statement of observation. He had seen me. He had noticed the way I worked, the quiet diligence that was my only real skill. For a moment, the loneliness in my chest eased, replaced by a strange, warm feeling of being truly seen. My carefully constructed routine, my fortress of solitude, suddenly felt less like a shelter and more like a cage. He was offering a key, not just to his house, but to a different possibility for myself. One where I wasn't just the quiet boy behind the counter, fading into the background. I took a breath. A real one, deep and full. It felt like the first one I'd taken all day. When would you want me to start? I asked. The first day, I drove my sputtering old car up the long, winding driveway to his house. The gravel crunched under my tires, a sound that seemed too loud in the profound quiet of the property. The house wasn't just a house, it was an estate, built of dark stone and rich wood. It sat overlooking the Pacific, solid and enduring, as if it had risen from the cliff itself. It was beautiful and intimidating in equal measure. Julian was waiting for me on the porch. He wore a simple gray Henley that stretched across his broad shoulders and dark jeans. He looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who knew how to fix things. He gave me a small, welcoming nod, and the knot of anxiety in my stomach loosened just a bit. "Thank you for coming, Leo," he said, his voice carrying easily in the still, salt-tinged air. "Let me show you where we'll be working." He led me inside. The interior was all warm wood, high ceilings, and vast windows that framed the endless blue of the ocean. It was immaculate, but it didn't feel like a museum. It felt like a home, albeit a very quiet one. He walked me through a wide hallway and opened a set of tall, dark wood doors. "This was Eleanor's library," he said softly. I stepped inside and my breath caught. It was 2 stories high, with shelves climbing all the way to the ceiling, accessible by a rolling ladder on a brass rail. A comfortable-looking leather armchair sat near a stone fireplace, and a large desk was positioned to look out at the sea. And books, thousands of them. The scent was overwhelming. Old paper, leather, and the faint, lingering trace of a floral perfume that must have been hers. My professional calm, my bookseller's composure, deserted me. I just stood there, taking it all in. It was the most beautiful room I had ever seen. A sanctuary, and my job was to dismantle it. Julian watched my reaction, a flicker of understanding in his gray eyes. "She loved this room," he said, his voice quiet. "The task is simple, in theory. I have a digital cataloging system. We'll scan the barcode of each book, assign it to a numbered box, and mark the box's contents in the system. Books she annotated will be set aside separately. I'll show you." He guided me to the desk, where a laptop and a scanner were set up. His proximity was a lot. I was hyper-aware of the warmth radiating from him, the clean scent of his soap, the way his larger hand moved near mine as he demonstrated the software. He was patient, his instructions clear and concise. He treated me not as an employee to be managed, but as a collaborator. "Any questions?" he asked, once he'd finished the demonstration. I shook my head, my voice still feeling lost somewhere in my chest. "No. It seems straightforward." "Good," he said. He looked around the room, at the towering walls of books, and for a second, the mask of calm composure slipped. I saw a deep, profound weariness in his expression, the heavy weight of the task ahead. It wasn't just about packing books. It was about packing up a life, a shared history. I'll be working in her studio just down the hall. If you need anything, just come and find me. We'll break for lunch around 1 inch, and then he was gone, leaving me alone in the silence of the library. The only sounds were the distant cry of a gull and the slow, heavy tick of a grandfather clock in the hall. I stood there for a long moment, surrounded by the ghosts of a life I couldn't imagine, my own small existence feeling utterly insignificant in comparison. Then I picked up the scanner, took a deep breath, and pulled the first book from the shelf. The days settled into a new rhythm. I'd arrive at 9, the morning mist still clinging to the cypress trees along the drive. Julian would already be up, a mug of coffee in his hand. We'd exchange quiet greetings, a brief discussion of the day's plan, and then we would retreat to our separate, silent tasks. I was in the library, he was in the studio. We were two solitary planets orbiting the same sun of memory and loss. I fell in love with the work. It was methodical, grounding. Each book I scanned and packed was a small piece of a puzzle I was slowly assembling. I learned about Eleanor Croft through her collection. She had an insatiable curiosity. There were books on botany, astronomy, medieval art, quantum physics, and poetry from a dozen different languages. She was a woman of immense intellect and passion. Sometimes, I'd find her notes in the margins, her elegant script a faint pencil whisper on the page, a question mark next to a line of poetry, an emphatic yes beside a philosophical argument. These were the books Julian had asked me to set aside. Each time I found one, I felt a strange mix of intrusion and connection. I was touching the most intimate parts of their shared intellectual life. I learned about Julian, too, in small, indirect ways. I saw the shelves he had clearly built himself, the joints perfect, the wood sanded to a silken finish. I found a book on woodworking, its spine broken, full of her annotations teasing him about his obsessive attention to detail. I found a first edition of a classic sailing novel with an inscription on the flyleaf. For my Julian, my steady anchor in every storm. All my love. Seeing that inscription felt like a punch to the gut. It was a stark reminder of what he had lost, and a confirmation of the deep, abiding love that had filled this house. It also created a new, sharp awareness of my own position here. I was a stranger, a paid hand, sorting through the sacred relics of their life together. The thought made me feel small and somehow shameful, as if my very presence was a desecration. Lunch was the only time we consistently interacted. Julian would emerge from the studio, a smudge of dust on his cheek, and prepare a simple meal for us in the vast, modern kitchen. Sandwiches, soup, a salad. We'd eat at the large wooden island, the silence between us comfortable, but layered with unspoken things. He would ask me about my progress, and I'd report on the number of boxes filled, the interesting titles I'd found. I, in turn, would ask about his work in the studio. He was sorting through canvases, old sketchbooks, and jars of dried-up paint. His descriptions were brief and factual, but his eyes would hold a distant, complicated expression. During those lunches, I started to study him more closely. I saw the way his fingers, strong and sure when handling tools or books, would sometimes pause, hovering over his coffee cup as if lost in a thought. I noticed the subtle shifts in his expression, the slight tightening of his jaw when he mentioned a specific painting, the softening around his eyes when he recalled a memory prompted by a book I'd found. He was a man who held his grief close, like a coat he couldn't take off. He wasn't performing sadness. He was simply living within it. And his quiet strength, his refusal to crumble under the weight of it all, was the most compelling thing I had ever witnessed. My silent admiration began to morph into something deeper, something more dangerous. A yearning for a connection that I had no right to feel. One afternoon, about a week into the job, I was on the rolling ladder, reaching for a book on the highest shelf. My fingers brushed against the spine, but I misjudged the distance, and the heavy art book tipped forward. I fumbled, trying to catch it, but it slipped through my grasp. I braced myself for the loud crash and the damage I had just caused. But the crash never came. I looked down to see Julian standing at the base of the ladder, the book held securely in his hands. I hadn't even heard him come in. He must have moved with a speed and silence that was startling. "Careful," he said, his voice calm, not a hint of admonishment in it. He looked up at me, and our eyes met. From my perch on the ladder, the angle was different. I could see the fatigue etched around his eyes more clearly, the silver in his hair catching the light from the window. My heart was hammering in my chest, a frantic bird trapped behind my ribs. "I'm so sorry," I breathed, my face flushing with embarrassment. "I thought I had it. It's fine," he said, his gaze steady. No harm done. He didn't move. He just stood there, holding the book, looking up at me. The space between us felt charged, humming with a strange energy. It was more than just an employer and his temporary help. It felt personal. He held the book up to me. "Here." I started to climb down, but he shook his head slightly. "No, stay there. You'll just have to climb back up." He reached up, his arm extending to its full length. It was still a few inches short. "A bit of a design flaw in this system," he said, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "Eleanor always said it was built for someone taller." Without another word, he stepped onto the bottom rung of the ladder. The whole structure shifted slightly with his added weight. He was suddenly much closer, so close I could feel the warmth from his body. He was right behind me, his chest just inches from my back. My breath hitched. I could smell the faint scent of sawdust and coffee on him. He reached up again, easily placing the book back in its spot on the high shelf. His hand brushed against mine as he did so. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact. But it felt like an electric shock. A current of heat shot up my arm, and I had to grip the ladder tightly to steady myself. His hand lingered there for a fraction of a second too long. Or maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was just my own desperate longing, projecting meaning onto a simple, helpful gesture. He stepped back down, and the ladder settled. "There," he said, his voice a little rougher than usual. He cleared his throat. "Just be careful, Leo." He turned and walked out of the library, leaving me alone on the ladder, my heart pounding, my skin tingling where he had touched me. The quiet of the room rushed back in, but it was different now. It was filled with the echo of his presence, the memory of his closeness. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the bookshelf, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. It was just an accident, a helpful gesture. It meant nothing. But I knew, with a certainty that was both terrifying and exhilarating, that it meant everything. The fortress I had built around myself was beginning to crumble, and I had no idea what I would find in the ruins. The incident with the ladder changed the atmosphere between us. The comfortable silence of our shared workspace became laced with a new, unspoken tension. It was in the way our eyes would meet for a moment too long over lunch, in the careful space we now left between ourselves when passing in the hallway. We were both acutely aware of a boundary that had been brushed against, a line that we were now carefully, deliberately, not crossing. I became even more observant, my senses dialed to a higher frequency whenever he was near. I started to analyze his every micro-expression, every small gesture, searching for confirmation of what I thought I'd felt. A fool's errand, I told myself. I was projecting my own loneliness onto a grieving man who was simply being kind. But the hope, stubborn and persistent, refused to be extinguished. I watched the way his hands moved as he worked. He was down the hall in Eleanor's art studio, sorting through canvases, sketchbooks, and supplies. Occasionally, I would walk past the open door on my way to the kitchen and see him standing in the middle of the room, a canvas held gently in his hands, his expression lost in memory. He wasn't just packing things away. He was saying a long, slow goodbye. And the quiet dignity with which he did it broke my heart a little more each day. One afternoon, he called me into the studio. "Leo, could you give me a hand with something?" I walked in, my heart giving its familiar nervous flutter. The room was flooded with northern light from a massive wall of windows. Canvases were stacked against the walls, some finished, some just started. The air smelled of turpentine and oil paint, a scent that was so uniquely Eleanor's. Julian was standing in front of a large, heavy oak flat file cabinet, the kind used to store large drawings. "I need to move this to the other side of the room," he said, gesturing to the piece of furniture. "It's heavier than it looks." "I don't want to scratch the floors, of course," I said, moving to the other side of the cabinet. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. "On 3. 1, 2, 3" we lifted together. He was right. It was incredibly heavy. My muscles strained under the weight. We shuffled sideways, our steps awkward and uncoordinated at first, then falling into a rhythm. We were close, our shoulders nearly touching, our breathing synchronized with the effort. It was the most physically cooperative thing we had done, a small, shared struggle. Halfway across the room, My hand slipped. The corner of the cabinet dipped, and I grunted with the effort of holding it up. Easy, Julian's voice came, low and steady beside me. I've got it. Let's set it down for a second. We lowered the cabinet gently to the floor. I stood up, flexing my aching fingers, my face flushed. Sorry, I mumbled. Don't be, he said, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple with the back of his wrist. It's a beast. He looked at me, a genuine, warm smile reaching his eyes for the first time. It transformed his face, softening the stern lines and chasing away some of the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. Eleanor bought it at an old architect's sale, he said, his voice tinged with a fond nostalgia. She fell in love with it. I told her it was ridiculously impractical. She told me I was ridiculously practical. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. She was right, of course. It was the most he had ever voluntarily shared about her. A small, perfect memory offered up like a gift. It felt intimate, a crack in the stoic facade he maintained. I found my voice. It's a beautiful piece of furniture, it is, he agreed, his hand resting on the warm wood. He looked at me, his smile fading into something more serious, more vulnerable. Thank you for this, Leo. For helping me. I don't think I could do this alone. The admission hung in the air between us. It wasn't just about moving furniture. He was talking about the whole impossible task of sorting through a shared life. He was admitting to a need, a weakness, and he was admitting it to me. This is it. This is the moment where I step forward or retreat. My mind screamed at me to keep it professional, to offer a polite, meaningless platitude and get back to work. But my heart, that foolish, hopeful thing, had other ideas. I'm glad I can help, I said, and I made myself hold his gaze. It's an honor to be trusted with it. His eyes searched mine, and I saw a flicker of surprise, and then something else. Gratitude. Relief. He knew I understood. He knew I saw beyond the boxes and the cataloging. He cleared his throat, the moment of vulnerability passing, the stoic mask settling back into place, but not as securely as before. Well, he said, his voice businesslike again. Let's get this beast to its final resting place. We lifted the cabinet again, and this time, we moved in perfect sync, as if we'd done it 100 times before. When we set it down in its new spot, we were both breathing a little heavily. Julian straightened up and looked at me. Leo, he started, then stopped. He seemed to be searching for the right words. I hope this arrangement isn't uncomfortable for you. I know our situations are very different. I want to be clear that your employment here is just that. There are no other expectations. Your comfort and safety are my primary concern. It was a carefully worded speech, designed to give me an out, to reassure me that there was no pressure, no hidden agenda. He was acknowledging the power imbalance between us, his wealth, his age, his status as my employer, and he was deliberately, carefully, handing the power back to me. He was telling me that I was in control. It was the kindest, most respectful thing anyone had ever done for me. It was also a question. He was asking if I was okay, if his presence, if this tension between us, was unwanted. My entire future, my entire sense of self, seemed to hinge on my next words. I could retreat into the safety of my shell, thank him for his concern, and let this moment pass, letting the unspoken thing between us wither and die. Or I could be brave, for once in my life. I took a small step closer. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I'm not uncomfortable, Julian, I said, my voice quiet but steady. Not at all. The relief that washed over his face was profound and unmistakable. It was as if he had been holding his breath and had only just allowed himself to exhale. He gave me a single, slow nod. He understood my answer. He had heard what I'd said and what I hadn't. The unspoken thing between us was no longer a question. It was a fact, and it was terrifying, and it was wonderful. The third week of my work at the house brought with it the first real storm of the season. The sky turned a bruised purple-gray, and the wind howled around the stone corners of the house, rattling the massive windows in their frames. The sea, visible from the library, was a churning chaos of white-capped waves. It felt as though the world outside had finally decided to match the turmoil I was feeling inside. The storm knocked out the power in the late afternoon. One moment, the library was filled with the warm, golden light of the lamps. The next, we were plunged into a deep, premature twilight. The only sounds were the raging wind and the frantic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, which seemed to be counting down to something momentous. A few moments later, Julian appeared in the doorway, a flashlight in his hand. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the motes of dust dancing in the air. "You okay in here?" he asked, his voice a calm anchor in the growing darkness. "Fine," I said, my own voice sounding small. "Just a bit of a surprise. It'll be out for a while, most likely," he said. "A tree probably came down on the line up the road. We should probably call it a day. It's going to be dark soon, and I don't want you driving down the hill in this." I started to gather my things, my movements clumsy in the near dark. I was disappointed. I didn't want to leave. The thought of going back to my empty, cold apartment felt more lonely than ever before. "Actually," Julian said, his voice thoughtful, "the road might not be safe. Why don't you stay for dinner? By the time we're done, the storm might have passed. If not, well, there's a guest room." The offer hung in the air, simple, practical, and yet loaded with 1,000 implications. My heart did a slow, painful flip in my chest. Staying here, overnight, in this house, with him. "I don't want to impose," I said, the automatic, polite refusal falling from my lips even as every part of me screamed to accept. He took a step into the room, the flashlight beam dancing across the shelves. "It's not an imposition, Leo. It's a sensible precaution. I'd worry about you on that road." He was worried about me. The simple, protective statement disarmed me completely. No one had worried about me in a very long time. "Okay," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," he nodded, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "Good. Come to the kitchen. I'll light some candles, and we'll find something to eat." The kitchen, lit by the flickering glow of a dozen candles, felt like a different world. The storm raged outside, a wild, chaotic beast, but in here, it was warm and safe. The candlelight softened the hard, modern lines of the room, making it feel intimate, like a haven. Julian moved with a quiet competence, pulling out a block of cheese, a loaf of bread, and a bottle of red wine. He seemed completely at ease, as if power outages and candlelit dinners were a regular occurrence. I, on the other hand, felt wired, every nerve ending tingling with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. He handed me a glass of wine. Our fingers brushed as I took it, and the now familiar jolt of electricity shot through me. This time, neither of us pulled away immediately. His gaze held mine, his gray eyes dark and unreadable in the flickering light. The silence stretched, filled only by the howl of the wind. It was in that moment that a car's headlights swept across the kitchen window, cutting through the darkness. We both turned, startled. A moment later, there was a sharp, insistent knock at the front door. Julian's brow furrowed. "Who on earth?" He set down his wine glass and went to the door. I could hear muffled voices, one of them a woman's, sharp and questioning. A moment later, he returned to the kitchen, followed by a woman in a stylish raincoat, her face a mask of pinched concern. It was Carol, a woman from the town's historical society, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper curiosity. "Julian, darling, I was so worried," she exclaimed, her eyes darting around the candlelit kitchen before landing on me. Her expression shifted from concern to a sort of predatory interest. "Oh," she said, her voice dripping with insinuation. "I see you have company." I felt my face burn. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. The intimacy of our quiet evening was shattered, replaced by the harsh glare of outside perception. I was the young, poor bookstore clerk, alone in the dark with the wealthy, reclusive widower. I knew exactly what she was thinking. Julian's demeanor became instantly cooler, his posture straightening. He was a fortress again, shielding me with his presence. "Carol," he said, his voice flat and devoid of warmth. "Leo was working here when the power went out. The storm made the road unsafe, so I asked him to stay for dinner." He stated it as a simple series of facts, leaving no room for interpretation. But Carol was not so easily deterred. "Of course," she said, her smile not reaching her eyes. She looked me up and down, a dismissive glance that made me feel like an insect. "How convenient." The air crackled with tension. I felt Julian's anger, a palpable force in the small space. He took a half-step forward, placing himself slightly in front of me, a subtle, protective gesture that did not go unnoticed by either of us. "Is there something you needed, Carol?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. She was taken aback by his directness, her social maneuvering hitting a wall of solid ice. "Oh, Well, I just wanted to make sure you were all right with the power out. But I see you're perfectly fine. Her gaze flickered to me again, lingering for a moment. I'll let you get back to your dinner. She bustled out as quickly as she had arrived, leaving a trail of cloying perfume and awkward silence in her wake. The front door clicked shut, and we were alone again. But the atmosphere had changed. The bubble of our quiet intimacy had been burst. The outside world, with its judgments and its assumptions, had forced its way in. I couldn't look at him. I stared at my wine glass, my knuckles white where I gripped the stem. The shame was a hot, bitter thing in my throat. She saw me as an opportunist, a gold digger. And maybe, a small, ugly voice in my head whispered, maybe she was right. What was I doing here? What right did I have to be in this house, drinking this man's wine, wanting what I wanted? Leo, Julian's voice was soft, but it cut through my spiral of self-doubt. I forced myself to look up at him. His face was grim, his jaw tight with an anger that was clearly directed at Carol, not at me. I'm sorry, he said. You shouldn't have been subjected to that. It's fine. I lied, my voice thin. I should probably go. The storm seems to be letting up a bit. I started to move toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating weight of the situation. No, the word was quiet, but it had the force of a command. I stopped. Don't let her chase you away. Please. Stay. He took a step closer to me. The space between us was electric. What she thinks, what anyone in this town thinks, does not matter to me, he said, his voice low and intense. Does it matter to you? It was a direct challenge. A question that demanded more than a simple yes or no. He was asking me to choose. To either retreat into the shadows, scared of gossip and judgment, or to stand here, with him, in the light of these candles, and own this thing that was growing between us. This is it. The real breaking point. There is no more hiding, no more pretending this is just a job. The world has seen us, and now we have to decide what it is they are seeing. I look at him. I really look at him. His face, etched with concern for me. His stance, solid and protective. His eyes, dark and searching, waiting for my answer. In this moment, the age difference, the money, the town gossip, it all fades into the background. All that's left is him, and me, and this fragile, terrifying, beautiful thing that has taken root in the quiet rooms of this house. My breath is shallow, my heart a frantic, hopeful drum. I am so tired of being afraid. No, I say, and my voice is clearer, stronger than I ever thought it could be. It doesn't matter to me. The tension in his shoulders visibly releases. A slow, profound relief washes over his features, and he closes the remaining distance between us. He stops just a foot away, close enough that I can feel the heat from his body, close enough that I can see the flicker of the candlelight reflected in his pupils. He lifts a hand, slowly, as if giving me every possible chance to pull away. He doesn't touch me, not yet. His fingers hover in the air, near my cheek. Leo, he says, his voice a low murmur, thick with an emotion he no longer tries to hide. I have tried to be professional. I have tried to respect the boundaries of our arrangement. But he trails off, his gaze dropping to my lips for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes. I am failing. My own confession rises in my throat, raw and honest. I haven't been professional since the day I walked in here. I admit, the words a whispered truth. I think I was lost long before that. A small, sad smile touches his lips. I think I was, too. And then he finally closes that last inch of space. His fingers, warm and slightly rough, gently cup my jaw. The touch is electric, a jolt of pure connection that travels through every nerve in my body. It is not a gesture of ownership, but of reverence, of asking. His thumb strokes softly along my cheekbone, and I lean into the touch, my eyes fluttering shut for a moment. This is real. This is happening. He doesn't rush. He gives me time, lets me feel the weight and the warmth of his hand, lets me meet his gaze again. His eyes are asking the final question, the one that needs no words. I give him my answer. I rise up on my toes, just slightly, and close the last bit of distance between us. The first touch of his lips is soft, tentative. A question. I answer by pressing back, a quiet confirmation. The kiss deepens, and it is everything I didn't know I was starving for. It is not a kiss of frantic passion, but of slow, dawning recognition. It is the feeling of coming home to a place you've never been before. It tastes of red wine and the salty air of the storm, and it feels like acceptance, like safety, like the end of a long, lonely journey. His other hand comes up to my waist, pulling me gently against him. I can feel the solid, steady beat of his heart against my own frantic one. I slide my hands up his chest, my fingers curling into the soft fabric of his shirt. He is so solid, so real. The quiet foundation I had only ever dared to dream of. When we finally break apart, we are both breathless. He rests his forehead against mine, our eyes closed. The candlelight flickers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The storm still rages outside, but in here, in this small circle of warmth and light, there is only a profound and perfect calm. Leo, he whispers, his breath warm against my skin. The name is a prayer. Julian, I whisper back. And for the first time, his name on my lips feels right. It feels like the beginning of everything. The morning after the storm was unervingly beautiful. The sky was scrubbed clean, a pale, brilliant blue, and the rising sun cast a path of glittering gold across a sea that was as calm as glass. The world felt new, washed clean. I felt new. I woke up in the guest room, the sheets smelling faintly of lavender and cedar. For a moment, a sliver of panic wedged its way into my chest. The familiar morning after dread. What have I done? What happens now? The realities of our situation came rushing back in. The age gap, the wealth, my job. I was his employee. I had kissed my boss. The thought made my stomach clench with a familiar, sickening anxiety. I dressed quickly and made my way downstairs, my footsteps silent on the thick runner in the hallway. The house was quiet. I expected to find him in the kitchen, for us to have an awkward, stilted conversation over coffee that would define the new, fragile terms of our relationship. But he wasn't in the kitchen. I found him in the library, my workspace. He was standing by the large window, a mug of coffee in his hand, looking out at the calm sea. He turned as I entered, and his expression wasn't awkward or regretful. It was calm, steady, and warm. The relief that flooded through me was so intense, it almost made my knees weak. "Good morning," he said, his voice the same low, reassuring baritone it had always been. "There's coffee in the kitchen." I wasn't sure how you took it. It was such a simple, domestic thing to say, but it was a powerful reassurance. He wasn't treating last night as a mistake or a complication. He was treating it as a new morning. I went and poured myself a mug, my hands trembling slightly. When I returned to the library, he was still by the window. I stood beside him, not too close, leaving a respectful space between us. We both watched the sun climb higher over the water, the silence comfortable, but filled with unspoken questions. He was the one who broke it. "Leo," he said, turning to face me. "About last night, here it comes," I thought. The gentle letdown. The "this was a mistake" speech. I braced myself. "I want to be very clear," he continued, his gray eyes serious and direct. "That changes nothing about our working arrangement, unless you want it to. Your job is secure. Your pay is what we agreed. You are free to walk away from this contract at any time, with full payment, no questions asked. And you are free to walk away from whatever this is between us, at any time." He paused, letting the words sink in. "I will not have you feel trapped or obligated. Not by this job, not by me. Your independence and your choice in this matter are the most important things." I was stunned into silence. I had been expecting a conversation about feelings, about the kiss. Instead, he was talking about my autonomy. He was addressing the power imbalance head-on, not by pretending it didn't exist, but by actively working to dismantle it, to ensure I felt safe and free. He was using his power not to control me, but to empower me. The last vestiges of my fear and anxiety dissolved, replaced by a wave of profound gratitude and an emotion so deep and overwhelming it felt like love. "I don't want to walk away," I said, my voice thick. "From any of it." A slow, beautiful smile spread across his face, the one that reached his eyes and made him look 10 years younger. "Good," he said softly. "That's very good to hear." He didn't move to touch me. He respected the space I had created, letting me be the one to close it. And I did. I took a step forward and reached out, my fingers lacing with his. His hand was warm and strong, and his fingers tightened around mine, a silent, solid promise. We stood there for a long time, holding hands, watching the new day begin. We decided, mutually, to finish the job. It was important, we both agreed, to see the contract through. It maintained a sense of normalcy, a structure that we could navigate as we figured out what, exactly, we were to each other. But everything was different. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet, joyful intimacy. Our lunches were no longer silent. He told me stories about Eleanor, not with sadness, but with a gentle, loving humor. He told me about his early career, the risks he'd taken, the failures he'd learned from. I, in turn, found myself opening up about my own past, the reasons I'd come to Port Blossom seeking quiet and solitude. I told him about the family that had never understood me, the relationship that had left me feeling small and broken. He listened, his attention absolute, his empathy a quiet, healing balm. A few days later, we had to make a trip into town to pick up more packing supplies. It was our first public outing since the kiss, and I felt a nervous flutter as we walked down the main street toward the hardware store. It was one thing to exist in the secluded bubble of his house on the cliff. It was another to be out here, where eyes were watching. As if on cue, we saw Carol, the nosy neighbor, coming out of the bakery. Her eyes widened when she saw us walking together, and a smug, knowing little smile touched her lips. I felt my face flush, and I instinctively started to pull my hand back from where it had been lightly brushing against Julian's. But Julian was faster. Before I could pull away, his hand found mine, his fingers lacing firmly with my own. It wasn't a defiant gesture, not an aggressive one. It was quiet, simple, and utterly resolute. He didn't look at Carol. He just kept walking, his pace steady, his head held high, his hand holding mine as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He was claiming me, not as a possession, but as a partner. He was telling the world, and more importantly, he was telling me that he was not ashamed, not afraid. He was standing with me. We walked past Carol, Julian giving her a polite, distant nod. I kept my eyes focused straight ahead, but I could feel her stare on our joined hands. And for the first time, I didn't care. The warmth of his hand in mine was a shield, an anchor. Her judgment couldn't touch me. We walked into the hardware store, and he didn't let go of my hand until we needed to pick up the boxes. That small, public act of solidarity was more powerful than 100 declarations. It settled the last of my doubts. This wasn't a fling or a secret. This was real. This was a man who knew his own heart, and who was not afraid to stand by what he felt. The final box was packed on a Friday afternoon. The library, once a vibrant, living space, was now stark and quiet, filled with neat stacks of brown cardboard. The shelves were empty, the desk was clear. My job was done. A strange mix of pride and sadness settled over me. This project, the thing that had brought us together, was over. I scanned the last book, a slim volume of poetry by Mary Oliver that had been on the nightstand, and placed it carefully in the box marked personal. I taped it shut and wrote the final box number on the side. Julian came and stood in the doorway, taking in the empty room. His expression was complex, a mixture of grief, closure, and something new, something hopeful. "You did a wonderful job, Leo," he said. "Thank you. It was my pleasure," I said, and I meant it. "So," he said, his hands in his pockets. "The contract is officially complete." My heart sank a little. The formal language felt like a step backward. Was this it? Did we go back to being Julian Croft, the wealthy recluse, and Leo, the bookstore clerk? He must have seen the flicker of fear in my eyes, because he crossed the room and gently took my hands in his. "Which means," he continued, his voice soft, "that I am no longer your employer. And I can ask you a question not as a boss, but just as a man." He paused, his thumbs stroking the backs of my hands. "Leo, will you have dinner with me tonight? Not here. Out. In town. As a date." The word date hung in the air, shimmering with promise. He was drawing a clear line. The work was over. This new thing was just beginning. He was asking me to step across that line with him, publicly, willingly. "I would love that," I said, a wide, genuine smile breaking across my face. That night, we ate at the nicest restaurant in town, a small place with white tablecloths and a view of the harbor. We talked and laughed, and it felt easy, natural. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be someone else. I was just Leo, and that was enough. After dinner, we walked along the pier, the cool night air fresh with the scent of salt and sea. The lights of the town twinkled behind us. We stopped at the end of the pier, looking out at the dark, quiet water. I was thinking, Julian said, turning to me. Those shelves look awfully empty now, I nodded. They do. A house needs books, he said. It needs life. I was thinking, maybe we could fill them up again. Together. With our books, my breath caught. Our books. The word was a quiet explosion in my chest. He wasn't just talking about books. He was talking about a future. He was talking about building a new life, a new story, on the foundation of the old one. He was inviting me in, not as a guest, not as an employee, but as a partner. There's just one box left to pack, I said quietly, thinking of the last box of my own meager belongings in my tiny apartment. The box of things I'd kept through all the moves, the things that made me me. He smiled, understanding my meaning completely. Leave that one for me, he said softly. We can unpack it together. And in that moment, looking at his kind, steady face, illuminated by the soft glow of the harbor lights, I knew I was home. The fortress I had built around my heart hadn't been stormed or conquered. The door had simply been opened, gently, by a man who had the patience to wait until I was ready to walk through it myself. The quiet life I had craved was not about solitude, I realized. It was about peace. And peace, I was finally learning, was not the absence of other people. It was the presence of the right one. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.